Beware, citizen, you are now departing from the world of allowable opinion. The Tom Woods Show.
Welcome, everybody. It is Friday, January 24th, 2014. We're talking to Walter Williams today, the great Walter Williams. Walter Williams, you all know, he's the John M. Olin Distinguished Professor of Economics at George Mason University and a nationally syndicated columnist. He also fills in for Rush Limbaugh on Rush Limbaugh's radio program. Professor Williams has written 10 books, among them The State Against Blacks, Up from the Projects, an autobiography, and most recently, Race and Economics, How Much Can Be Blamed on Discrimination. And I'm so pleased to be able to welcome to the program Walter Williams. Walter Williams, thanks so much for being here.
Well, thank you.
All right, I want to start off, before we get into the listener questions, and by the way, some of my listener questions were things like, ask him how he got to be so awesome. So we're not going to do that. I'm sorry to say. We'll skip those, but I thought you'd appreciate knowing the extent of your fan base out there. But I want to start off with a recent column of yours in which you were talking about the idea, an idea you've talked about in the past. You're talking about the idea of peaceful secession, which sounds so crazy and radical to most people, and yet you explain it as if it's just common sense. So can you just tell us, what was the point of that article? What were you driving at there?
Well, yes. Well, the name of the article is Parting Company, and I've talked about this before, and I asked the question, that is, should people if one group of people prefers a strong government control management of people's lives, while another group prefers liberty and people desire to be alone, I was asking the question, should they be required to enter into conflict with one another to have their way? Should peace-loving people, liberty-loving people, should they be forced to enter into conflict with those people who want, government control? And I say no, they should not be forced into conflict. That is, they should part company. And I was given the example that the problem that we face as a nation is very similar to a problem in a marriage, and that is one partner in the marriage disobeys the marital vows, tries to impose all kinds of restrictions on the other partner, and the question is, should they be forced to fight, or should they peaceably separate? And I think that they should peaceably separate. Now, when people talk about bring up this issue, they bring up the issue of the war between the states in 1861, and they point out, well, do we want all this bloodshed? And I say, no, we don't want the bloodshed. We want people to be able to peaceably separate from one another. That is, and matter of fact, there's a group of young people, and they're trying to organize about 20,000 Americans to move to the state of New Hampshire.
Yeah.
And then peaceably take over the government, through the voting, through the democratic process, and then send their senators and congressmen to Washington to negotiate with Congress to obey the Constitution. And if Congress doesn't obey the Constitution, they should make some of them are saying they should make a unilateral declaration of independence.
Why do you think it is, though? When you explain something like this, it sounds so logical. It doesn't sound like you're saying anything crazy. But yet, for some reason, Americans seem to be almost allergic to the idea of secession. They're okay with secession if it's going on somewhere else in the world. The Czechs and the Slovaks can secede from one another. But for some reason, it's unthinkable for the Union to be divided into smaller parts. Why do you think that is?
I don't know, but I think that most Americans do not have a very good understanding of our history. That is, when we seceded from King George, well, the Treaty of Paris was written in 1783, and the Treaty of Paris established 13 sovereign nations. These were New York was a nation, Pennsylvania was a nation, and Alabama was a nation, and so these nations came together in 1787 to have a confederacy, to have a federalist system, and matter of fact, if you read the ratification documents of New York, Rhode Island, and Virginia, in the ratification documents, they say that if the federal government becomes abusive of the powers that we've delegated to it, we have the right to resume those powers. And matter of fact, the Constitution of the United States would have never been ratified if the states did not believe that they had the right to secede. And I just point out one other thing, that is, we have to keep in mind the average American just does not know that the federal government was created by the states. That is, the states are the principals, and the federal government is the agent of the states. And principals have the right to fire an agent.
Well, I couldn't have said it better myself, and indeed I have tried to say it better than that, but I think that's the point, is who were the principals and who is the agent. And on that topic, of course, I can't help bringing up the subject of state nullification. You were kind enough to write a nice blurb on the back cover of my book on that subject, and then you testified in front of either the House or Senate Judiciary Committee, I think, in South Carolina.
It was the House.
It was the House. Okay, on the subject of nullification, and we were all cheering you for that. And this has become a bit of a controversy. There are people who increasingly support this idea, but then you find some people on the right, in right-wing radio, I don't want to mention names, who are quite abusive toward people who believe in the idea of state nullification. Can we put you officially on the record as being in the pro-nullifier camp?
Well, I take the position of Jefferson and Madison when they wrote the Kentucky
and Virginia
resolutions.
Yeah.
And they said that if the federal government, if Congress makes laws that are unconstitutional, we have the right to ignore those laws. We have the right to nullify those laws. And moreover, getting involved with the issue of what's constitutional and what's not constitutional, I believe was Madison or either Jefferson, I forget right now, said that we should not give the Supreme Court a monopoly on the interpretation of the Constitution. Because if we give the Supreme Court a monopoly on the interpretation of the Constitution, then we'll be living under oligarchy.
And it turns out they weren't just making that up. As a matter of fact, we now know exactly what their dystopia that they feared would be like. Now,
I would say, and when I was in South Carolina, testifying in South Carolina, we were talking about nullification of Obamacare. That is to make the citizens of the state of South Carolina immune to what they did not have to obey Obamacare laws, and Obamacare is not in the Constitution. So why should the people of South Carolina or any state obey a law that's not in the Constitution? But you might say to me, there are a whole lot of laws that we are forced to obey that are not in the Constitution.
Yeah, but that is the fundamental question, and there never really is a good answer to it. I want to shift gears, though. I want to take a couple questions from the listeners, and one that came up that I found interesting was they want to know what your thoughts are on Martin Luther King. A couple of people in recent history, Martin Luther King, and then I want to add Nelson Mandela. What are your thoughts on both of these figures?
Well, I think that the Martin Luther King's his role in the civil rights movement, I think was very, very important to our country. But however, I think that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 evolved out of the civil rights movement, much of it led by Martin Luther King, and I think that writing the civil rights, the 1964 Civil Rights Act was a big mistake. I think that what the federal government should have done or what the court should have done at the time was to say, look, the United States Constitution applies to every single American, regardless of religion, race, et cetera, and just leave it at that. And now, Nelson Mandela, he was, we might say that, according to today's standards, he engaged in terroristic acts. But that does not necessarily make him a bad fellow, because if you ask King George about the founding fathers of our nation, he would have probably called them terrorists as well. But I think that Nelson Mandela, I think he was very, very important to moving South Africa away from the apartheid regime. That is, he was not a mean person. He sought reconciliation as opposed to revenge. And it's not, throughout a lot of history, when one tyrant is overthrown, another tyrant takes his place. Matter of fact, many times when I visited South Africa quite a few times during the apartheid era, and I was telling the people who I spoke to, large audiences, I said the issue is not getting rid of apartheid. The question is what is going to replace it, because there are things that are worse than apartheid. And we've seen them under Mao Zedong, Hitler, and Stalin.
All right, I want to shift gears and ask you, would you describe yourself as a libertarian? Do you use that word?
Well, a small L libertarian. I'm not a part of any political movement.
So if that's the case, how do you answer what must be a very, very, almost drearily common objection from people who would say, look, Williams, I took that conceit out of your columns. Look, Williams, don't you understand that it was federal actions again and again, whether it's affirmative action or anti-discrimination law or what have you, that created the black middle class and allowed people to prosper? And if you were in charge, well, you can finish the rest of that question. How do you answer that?
Well, most of the problems that black Americans faced in our country from its inception was a failure of government to do the job. That is, the people were able to get these discriminatory laws and Jim Crow laws, and because of with the help of government. And the government ignored the extra legal measures that were taken, such as lynching and beating and stuff like that, to enforce segregation. I think one of the questions one has realized is that whenever you see a law on the books, one of your first suspicions should be is that law is on the books because not everybody would behave according to the specifications of the law. And so if restaurants or theaters or train companies, trolley cars, would not allow blacks to enter under the same condition of whites, why in the world would you ever need a law, segregation laws? Evidently, some whites would have. And so the system would have tended to collapse. But speaking of discrimination, I believe that people have the right to engage in discrimination on any basis they want. That is, you can discriminate as far as race or sex or criminal background, et cetera, but you don't have the right to use government to force other people to concur with your discrimination. And a lot of times I've written articles about it. As a matter of fact, I've written a whole chapter in one of my recent books, Race and Economics, and pointing out that people discriminate all the time. When I was choosing a wife to marry, I didn't give every woman equal opportunity. I discriminate against Chinese, white women, Italian women, women with criminal backgrounds, women did not bathe regularly, et cetera, et cetera.
All right, well, I want to harp on this a little bit because this is probably one of the hardest, most challenging objections for people to deal with, because I think the response comes back, well, are you telling me, though, that, okay, you believe in private property, I get it, but that you would want to live in a society where people could put a sign in front of their shop window saying such and such group can't come in here? Is that the society you want to live in?
I think that the true test of whether people believe in the idea of freedom of association doesn't come when you allow people to be free to associate in ways that you think they should. It comes when you allow people to be free to associate in ways that you find despicable. Now, it's just like free speech. The true test of one's commitment to free speech doesn't come when he allows people to say what he thinks they ought to say. The true test of one's commitment to free speech comes when he allows people to say things that he finds offensive. And it's the same thing with freedom of association. And so, yes, I would find it offensive that a person would not let me in their restaurant because I'm black. But nonetheless, I believe I hold freedom in such a high, liberty in such a high esteem that I wouldn't do anything to stop him. That is, I wouldn't do anything for people who voluntarily, without the aid of government, decided to discriminate against me or based on my race or based on any other attribute. They might not like tall people or handsome people.
You know, it's funny. Just the other day on my Facebook page, a belligerent person thought he was really sticking it to me by saying, "Hey, Woods, are you telling me that you would believe in a society in which the Aryan Brotherhood could have their own community and it would just be them and they would live there?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I guess I do, because I don't believe I should have a gun and be able to tell people where they ought to live. But why would that be a bad thing? I would like all these people to live apart from the rest of us so they don't have to be my next door neighbor. Like, why would that be a bad solution?" All right.
Well, I think you're absolutely right.
Now, and
then the point is that you have to keep in mind is that I don't believe if you said tomorrow that white restaurant owners have the right not to admit blacks, maybe you'd find a few that would refuse to admit blacks, but the overwhelming majority would. And the reason why is that these people are in business to make money.
Yeah, right. Especially today. I mean, profit margins are razor thin. Like, it is really costly to indulge your prejudices, especially
and another example of discrimination. Would you mind if the black people are 80% of professional basketball players, and they're the highest paid ones? And would you care if some team said, "Well, we're not going to have any black basketball players"? Well, probably the team would wind up in the cellar. Why would you force them to do something so that they can be more profitable or win more games?
I want to ask you, as we start to wind down here, who your major influences were, because you obviously came to hold views that are not exactly consonant with those of Jesse Jackson. And yet Jesse Jackson's views are much, much more common among blacks. How did you not get caught in that trap? Like, did you read different people? Were you traveling in different intellectual circles? How did Walter Williams come to be?
Well, I've always been a radical, wishing for people to leave me alone. But another thing I tell people, and maybe it's not as nice for me to say this, but I was fortunate enough. I'm 77 years old, and so I was fortunate enough to get most of my education, or virtually all of my education, before it became fashionable for white people to like black people. And so what that meant is that teachers and other mentors, they didn't give a damn about hurting my feet. They didn't give a damn about my self-esteem. They would say things like, "Walter, that's absolutely wrong. That's nonsense." And then I went to I got my PhD at UCLA, and I was under the influence of very tenacious mentors. I took classes from Milton Friedman, Armin Alshin, and Friedrich Hayek. Friedrich Hayek came and lectured a couple times.
Wow.
And so I had some tough-minded people. One time, one mentor, Axel Lanneford, a Swedish economist, he was on the faculty at UCLA. I was telling him, that I think that the minimum wage law is a good idea. This is back in the 60s.
Oh, okay.
And so he asked me, he said, "Well, which do you care about the most? The intentions behind the law or the effects of the law?" And to look at the effects of the law, why don't you read Yale Brosen's article? And he gave me a couple of Milton Friedman's articles, and then I read them, and I changed my mind. The evidence caused me to change my mind. And this was true with many things.
What do you make of what now seems to be the fashionable trend among economists to all of a sudden now support an increase in the minimum wage?
Well, I think they can support them, but they cannot deny the effects. What many economists are saying, well, look, or what some are saying, look, we recognize that there are unemployment effects of the minimum wage law, but we can take care of the unemployment by food stamps and welfare. But we say that, well, the people who get the jobs, will somehow be better off. And nonetheless, it is true. That is, those people who receive a higher wage and also keep their job, many of them will be better off for a while.
Yeah, you bet.
For example, it's very interesting that you see with at Wawa. If you go to Wawa and you go and order, well, there's nobody to take your order anymore.
Yeah, right. They mechanized
they're little machines.
Yeah. They got their wish.
Somebody makes a sandwich, and you go to the cashier. So what the higher minimum wages tend to reduce employment sooner or later.
All right, last thing, this can be quick, but I have a lot of people want to know, have you had second thoughts about the Iraq War and the ensuing years?
Well, I think that yeah, you have second thoughts, but I think that if we should have been there at all, that we should not have sent troops. So that is, we should have used we should have fought a more capital-intensive war. That is, if there's a basis for unseating Saddam Hussein, well, we could have easily unseated him and then just returned. But we decided to try to engage in nation building, and that was a major mistake.
Suppose somebody wants to dive into Walter Williams' work. Do you have one particular book you'd steer them to first?
Well, no. First I would suggest they would go to my webpage, is walterewilliams.com, and there are many things that I've written there, and there are a lot of videos that are on the webpage of lectures that I've given, and then I think one of the books that I'm proud of, a very small book, and is Economics and Race, or Race and Economics, and the subtitle is How Much Does Discrimination Explain?
Right,
so
right.
I don't believe that racial discrimination explains as much as people say it explains, which is not to deny the existence of racial discrimination, but it just does not explain very much nowadays.
Now, there's a great book, of course, I'm sure you know, Thomas Sowell had one of his underrated books, Civil Rights, Rhetoric, or Reality, takes on that topic. But a lot of that data would be out of date by now because the book is from the mid-'80s. So,
but some of the data will be at it, but the principles and theory is not.
Right. Well, Walter Williams, I sure appreciate your time. I mean, I think it was about 21 years ago, I was at an IHS event at Harvard you spoke at, and I got my copy of The State Against Blacks signed. I have cherished that thing ever since, and I sure appreciate your time today. Thanks so much.
Okay, Tom, let's do it again.
All right, everybody, that was Walter Williams. WalterEWilliams.com is the website. Next week on Tuesday, Peter Schiff will join us. And again, I want to solicit questions from you, the listener. What do you want me to ask Peter Schiff? Follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Like my Facebook page, facebook.com/Thomas E. Woods, and I will have a thread opening up there very soon for questions, suggestions. And then on Twitter, I'm at Thomas E. Woods. And just use hashtag AskPeter, and I'll do my best to get your question on the air. Remember to subscribe to the program on iTunes so you don't miss any episodes, because coming up soon, I'm going to be telling you how to get a hold of a copy of a book of transcripts, of ebook of transcripts of all the exciting interviews we did on this program in 2013. That's absolutely free. But only people who are listening to this program are going to find out how to get it. So make sure and subscribe on iTunes or on Stitcher. Also, you're running out of days in January to subscribe to my libertyclassroom.com and get a free copy of The Politically Incorrect Guide to American History, my New York Times bestseller. We are celebrating 10 years since the release of that book. And at libertyclassroom.com, you can learn U.S. history, economics, philosophy from me and from people I trust while you're driving your car. Absolutely great. And once you sign up, drop me a note on the contact page saying, hey, bum, give me my book. All right, remember, you're helping us pay our bills every time you enter Amazon through the little Amazon widget at TomWoodsRadio.com. We sure appreciate you doing that. Peter Schiff, Tuesday of next week. But I'm going to be talking to you by myself on Monday about the police state, the militarization of the police, all that stuff. We've got a great week of programs coming up. We'll see you then. Enjoy your weekend.
The Tom Woods Show.